Between intense emotions and unexpected challenges, this love story leads us to question, can the heart overcome the past? If you're ready to embark on this journey of discoveries and emotions, subscribe to the channel, like the video. Lucia was a determined young woman who worked at a local cafe in the city center. Every day, she woke up early to open the store and ensure her customers received the best service possible. She never minded how much she sweated to pay her bills. For her, the important thing was being independent and doing what she loved, taking care of people and serving them with a smile. Her dream was to make the cafe grow, but life was never easy. One day, a man entered the cafe and sat at the table by the window, the same one he always sat at. He had the presence of someone who knew exactly what they wanted and how to get it. He looked like one of those rich businessmen with expensive clothes, a luxury watch, and a cold, calculating look. Lucia recognized him by his attitude, but she wasn't impressed. She treated all her customers the same, with a genuine smile and impeccable courtesy. He looked at the menu, but his eyes fixated on her as she approached the table. She didn't know, but that penetrating gaze made him remember that he was in a place he liked to keep secret, far from the flash of cameras and the luxury that always surrounded him. "Good afternoon, sir. What can I get for you today?" Lucia asked with a welcoming smile. He studied her for a moment, as if analyzing her, before responding, "A cup of black coffee, no sugar, and maybe an almond croissant." She wrote down the order but didn't ask any more questions. To Lucia, he was just another customer. What she didn't know was that he always sat there because he was disguising himself, trying to live away from the world that surrounded him. His name was Victor Andrade, the millionaire CEO of the company that years later would be the one to buy the very cafe she worked at. That day he watched Lucia as she worked, intrigued by the ease with which she moved, her way of interacting with customers, always with a sincere smile. Something about her attracted him in an unusual way, but he knew he couldn't let her know who he really was. Not yet. The days passed and Victor found himself returning to the cafe at the same time each day. He watched Lucia from a distance, appreciating the way she carried herself with such ease. She didn't just work at the cafe, she breathed life into it. Her interactions with customers were seamless, her kindness radiating with every smile and small gesture. Victor, however, was not there to indulge in the charm of the cafe or the warmth of Lucia's presence. He had a hidden agenda. He had been observing the cafe for weeks now, collecting information. It wasn't just the quality of the food or the ambiance that intrigued him, it was Lucia herself. Something about her felt different, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he wanted to understand her better. One afternoon, as she brought him his usual coffee, he finally decided to speak up. He had waited long enough. The need to connect with her, to understand her beyond the facade of a mere employee, had become unbearable. "Hey, you know," Victor began, his voice casual yet purposeful, "you have a way of making everything here feel welcoming. Not many people can do that." Lucia paused, surprised by the compliment. It wasn't often that customers took the time to acknowledge her effort in such a personal way. "Thank you," she said a little shyly. "I love what I do. This place has become my second home." He smiled, though it was a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's clear. The way you work, the way you make people feel at ease, oh, it's impressive." Lucia returned the smile, a bit of pride swelling in her chest. "I believe in creating a space where people can relax, be themselves. Everyone deserves a little peace, even for just a few minutes." Victor felt a stir of admiration for her. She wasn't just a hard worker, she had a depth to her that was rare. He didn't know if it was her sincerity or the way she spoke about her passion for the cafe, but something in him shifted. He was no longer just an observer. He was beginning to feel drawn to her. "Maybe you can show me how to make the perfect coffee sometime," Victor said, his tone playful, but with an underlying sincerity. "I've always been curious about the art of it." Lucia chuckled softly, surprised by his request. "I'd be happy to," she replied. "It's all about the little details." As she walked away, Victor leaned back in his chair, lost in thought. What had started as an experiment to understand the business had now become something far more complicated, and he couldn't deny it. He was falling for her. Days turned into weeks, and Victor continued his quiet observations, unable to shake the growing feelings he had for Lucia. His visits to the cafe became more frequent, not because of the coffee, but because of her. Every glance, every conversation they shared, no matter how brief, drove him to want to know more about the woman behind the counter. She had a kind of warmth that seemed to light up the entire room, and it was becoming harder to keep his distance. One afternoon, while the cafe was quieter than usual, Victor decided to take a more daring step. He had become accustomed to his daily routine of sitting in the corner, pretending to be just another customer. But today, he felt a shift inside him. Today, he didn't want to hide anymore. Lucia was busy preparing an order when he approached the counter. The gentle hum of the cafe and the clinking of cups filled the air, but as soon as she noticed him, everything seemed to slow down. She flashed him a smile, but there was something different in the way she looked at him today, something more personal. "Back again?" Lucia asked lightly, wiping her hands on a towel. "I think you've made this your second home." Victor hesitated for a moment, then decided to throw caution to the wind. "Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you," he said, his voice calm but carrying a quiet intensity. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you." Lucia raised an eyebrow, her interest piqued. "Oh, what's that?" Victor took a deep breath, and for the first time since he began coming to the cafe, he was ready to be completely honest. "I know we've only spoken a few times, but I feel like there's a connection here. And I don't want to pretend anymore. I'm not just some random guy coming in for coffee every day." Lucia blinked, clearly caught off guard. "What do you mean?" Victor looked directly into her eyes, searching for any sign of understanding. "I'm the CEO of the company that owns this place," he revealed, his voice steady but heavy with the truth. "Victor Andrade." The silence between them was immediate and thick, as Lucia's expression shifted from surprise to disbelief. She took a step back, her eyes wide as the realization sank in. "Wait, you're the CEO?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're the millionaire I've been serving every day?" Victor nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "Yes, I've been coming here incognito to see how things really are, to understand the atmosphere of this cafe from the ground up." Lucia stood there, stunned, as the weight of his words hit her. All this time, the man she had shared pleasantries with, the man who had complimented her work and shared conversations, was the very person who held the power to change everything about her job. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Lucia's mind was racing, trying to process the shock of the revelation. Was he simply playing a game with her, or was there something more? "I never intended to deceive you," Victor continued, his tone softer now. I wanted to understand you. Understand the people working here. I didn't expect to become so involved." Lucia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "You should have told me sooner," she said quietly, still processing the revelation. "This whole time you've been watching me, judging everything about me without me even knowing who you were." Victor's face softened with regret. "I understand how you feel, and I'm sorry for not telling you, but I didn't want to come across as just the boss. I wanted to know the real you, not the version you might have shown to someone in my position." Lucia felt a mixture of emotions stirring inside her. Anger, surprise, confusion, but also something else. Something she hadn't expected. The man standing before her wasn't just some arrogant businessman. There was a vulnerability to him, a rawness she hadn't anticipated. "I don't know what to say," she finally whispered, looking away from him. "This is a lot to take in." Victor's heart sank, but he knew he had taken the first step. It was out in the open now. He had nothing left to hide. "I understand," he said softly. "Take all the time you need." As Lucia turned to walk away, her mind racing with everything she had just learned, Victor couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning. He had revealed his truth, and now the question was whether she would accept it, or him. The days following Victor's revelation were a whirlwind for Lucia. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, his calm, collected demeanor, the way he had confessed his truth. At first, she was furious. How could he have kept something so important from her for so long? How could he? The person who seemed to be so genuine have lied about who he was. But as the hours passed, a new wave of emotions started to build. Beneath the anger, there was something else, something she didn't want to acknowledge. She couldn't deny that there was a connection between them. The way he looked at her, the way he seemed to care, despite everything, despite the deception, made her feel something she had tried to bury for years. Lucia tried to focus on her work, but it was hard to concentrate. Every time her mind wandered, it found its way back to Victor. She had a million questions swirling in her mind, and yet whenever she saw him at the cafe, it was as if everything was too much to process. Victor, for his part, had stayed away for the past few days, giving her space. He knew he had messed up, but he also knew he couldn't undo the past. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could prove to her that his feelings were real, that he wasn't just some rich CEO with nothing but power to throw around. One evening, he decided to visit the cafe once again. It had been several days since they last spoke, and although he was nervous, he knew it was time to face Lucia again. When he entered, he saw her right away. She was standing behind the counter, her head down as she worked. She didn't seem to notice him at first, and for a moment he thought about leaving, but then he saw the way she glanced up at him. Just a quick look, but enough to make his heart skip a beat. "Lucia," he said softly, his voice steady but full of emotion. "Can we talk?" She looked at him, her face hardening slightly, but she didn't turn away. "I don't know if there's anything left to say, Victor," she replied, her tone measured but cold. "You've made your choice. You've kept your identity hidden. And now I'm left trying to understand what any of this was." Victor felt a sharp pain in his chest, but he pushed it aside. "I understand why you're upset. I lied. I deceived you. But I'm here to tell you that it wasn't out of malice. I wanted to understand you, to know the real person behind the smile I see every day. And I admit, I got too caught up in the mystery of it all. But the truth is, Lucia, I care about you. I've cared about you from the first moment I walked in here." Lucia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She didn't want to let him in, not after everything. But she couldn't stop the words that escaped her lips. "How am I supposed to believe you now?" she asked, her voice shaky. "You've been living a lie this entire time, Victor. How do I know that everything you said to me, everything you made me feel, was real?" Victor's heart ached at the pain in her words. He stepped closer to the counter, his gaze never leaving hers. "Because I'm standing here now, Lucia. I could have left the moment you found out who I was. I could have gone back to my world of luxury and power. But I stayed. I stayed because I couldn't walk away from you. I'm not asking for your forgiveness right now, but I am asking for a chance to prove myself to you." Lucia looked away, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to let her guard down and allow herself to trust him again. But another part of her, the part that had been burned by trust before, was scared. Scared of the possibility that he was just like everyone else, using his power to get what he wanted. Victor could see the conflict in her eyes, and he knew he had no right to ask for anything, but he couldn't stop himself from hoping. "I know this won't be easy," he said quietly, "but I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Lucia. I want to earn your trust, and I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere." Lucia was silent for a long time, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped down the counter. Finally, she met his gaze once more, her expression unreadable. "I can't promise anything," she said softly, "but I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to see where this goes. But you have to prove to me that you're not the man who lied to me." Victor nodded, relief flooding through him. "I'll prove it to you, Lucia. I promise." As he turned to leave, Lucia watched him go, her heart heavy with uncertainty. She wasn't sure where this would lead, or if she could ever fully trust him again. But for the first time in days, there was a flicker of hope. The days after their conversation felt heavy for both of them. Lucia was caught between two conflicting emotions, the lingering anger of betrayal and the small, tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, Victor was different. She had agreed to listen to him, to give him a chance to prove himself. But as each day passed, the weight of the decision grew heavier. Could she truly forgive him? Could she allow herself to fall for someone who had kept such an important secret from her? Victor, on the other hand, was trying his best to stay patient. He knew he couldn't rush Lucia. He had to give her the space she needed, but each passing day without her was like torture. He had never been the type of man to wait for anything, but now he found himself stuck in a situation he couldn't control. He had confessed his feelings, but now it was up to Lucia to decide how to move forward. Every time he saw her at the cafe, his heart fluttered. She was so close, and yet she seemed so far away. They exchanged polite nods, and every now and then he would catch a glimpse of her smile, but it wasn't the same as before. It was distant, careful, as if she was still trying to figure him out. One afternoon, as Lucia was working behind the counter, Victor entered the cafe, his usual spot by the window already empty. She looked up at him briefly, before quickly turning her attention back to the espresso machine. She was busy, but the tension in the air was palpable. Victor stood there for a moment watching her. He knew he couldn't wait any longer. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Lucia hesitated, her fingers still on the coffee grinder. She wanted to say no, to tell him that she wasn't ready to deal with him yet, but there was something in his voice, something sincere, that made her stop. "Not here," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "We can talk when I'm off shift, but it'll be brief." Victor nodded, understanding the unspoken need for privacy. "I'll wait," he said simply. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. She went through the motions of serving customers, but her mind kept drifting back to Victor. When her shift finally ended, she grabbed her jacket and walked to the back of the cafe, where he was waiting by the door. He stood when he saw her, his expression calm, but with an undercurrent of tension. He had been waiting for this moment, for her to finally give him the chance to explain himself fully. Lucia took a deep breath before speaking. "I've been thinking about everything you said, about you, about us." Victor nodded, not interrupting, his eyes soft. "I'm listening." She glanced down at her shoes for a moment before looking up at him. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. Part of me is still angry. Part of me wants to just walk away. But another part of me, I don't want to give up on this. On you." Victor's heart raced. It wasn't much, but it was everything he needed to hear. "Lucia, I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust. I know I messed up, and I know I don't deserve a second chance. But I'm willing to prove myself." Lucia bit her lip, looking at him closely. There was something in his eyes that she couldn't ignore, something genuine. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision. "I'm not promising anything," she said slowly, "but I'm willing to try, for both of us." Victor's face lit up with a smile that reached his eyes. "That's all I need. Just a chance." Lucia nodded, her heart feeling lighter than it had in days. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust had to be rebuilt, and feelings didn't change overnight. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was finally taking a step in the right direction. As she walked out of the cafe with Victor beside her, a sense of calm washed over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing: she wasn't alone in this anymore. After that night, things between Lucia and Victor changed, but not in the way either of them had imagined. There was no grand confession, no sweeping gestures. Instead, it was a gradual, unspoken understanding that bloomed between them like a flower in the early stages of spring. They didn't rush into anything, but rather allowed their feelings to unfold slowly, cautiously, and with a sense of vulnerability that neither had expected. Over the next few weeks, Lucia and Victor began to build a new kind of relationship, one where honesty, however painful, became the foundation. Their conversations, once casual and friendly, became deeper. They talked about their lives, their hopes, and the things they feared. They shared stories of their childhood, of broken dreams and unspoken regrets. And in these moments, Lucia started to see Victor, not just as the wealthy CEO, but as a man who was still learning, still figuring out who he wanted to be. One afternoon, as Lucia finished wiping down the cafe's tables, she noticed Victor sitting at his usual spot by the window. She was about to walk past him, but something stopped her. She hadn't planned on talking to him today. She had a lot on her mind. Yet for some reason she felt compelled to sit down and finally face the feelings she had been hiding. "Mind if I sit?" she asked softly, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. Victor looked up, his eyes brightening as he saw her. "Not at all. Please." She sat down, her hands resting nervously on the table. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it was charged with the weight of unspoken words. After a few moments, Victor leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice low, sincere. Lucia hesitated, her mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. "I've been thinking about us," she began. "About what we're doing. I'm still not sure if I'm ready for what this is becoming." Victor nodded, understanding the hesitation in her voice. "I get it," he said quietly. "I don't want to rush you into anything. I've made mistakes, and I know I can't just erase them. But I want you to know that I'm here. Whatever pace you need, I'm willing to go at that pace." Lucia looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there. She had been so afraid of moving forward, of what it might mean to trust him again. But sitting across from him, she realized something. She wasn't as afraid of him anymore. Maybe she had been more afraid of her own emotions, of opening her heart up to someone again after all the hurt she had been through. I think I'm ready to see where this can go," she said, her voice quiet but filled with certainty. "But I need you to understand, Victor. It won't be easy. There will be times when I'm confused, when I don't know what I want." Victor smiled gently, his heart swelling at her words. "I can handle that. I'm not asking for perfection, just the chance to be with you." For the first time in weeks, Lucia felt a sense of peace settle in her chest. She didn't know what the future held, and she wasn't sure how everything would work out. But for the first time, she felt ready to take the next step with him. As they sat together, the sound of the cafe around them faded into the background. It was just the two of them now, and for the first time in a long while, Lucia felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. As the days passed, Lucia and Victor's relationship slowly blossomed. It wasn't the kind of love that happened overnight. It wasn't a whirlwind romance full of grand gestures. Instead, it was the kind of love that grew gradually, steadily, like a seed planted in fertile soil. With every conversation, every moment spent together, they built something real. Victor was patient. He knew that Lucia had been through enough betrayal, enough hurt, that trust couldn't be rushed. But he also knew that the more he showed her his true self, the more she would begin to trust him. And that's exactly what he did. He was present, listening to her, offering his support without pushing. For the first time in his life, he wasn't trying to control the situation. He was letting things unfold naturally. One evening, after closing time at the cafe, Lucia and Victor sat in one of the cozy corners of the cafe, sipping their drinks in a comfortable silence. The place was empty now, the usual hustle and bustle of the day gone. The quiet felt different now, less lonely, more peaceful. They had fallen into a rhythm together, one that made both of them feel like they were in the right place. Lucia took a deep breath, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup as she stared out the window, watching the cars go by outside. "You know," she began, breaking the silence, "when I first met you, I thought you were just like everyone else. You seemed like one of those rich, untouchable businessmen just playing around, but I was wrong." Victor glanced at her, his expression softening as he listened. "I've been called a lot of things, but untouchable is definitely a new one," he joked lightly, trying to lighten the mood. Lucia smiled, but there was a trace of sadness in her eyes. "At first I couldn't see past the mask you were wearing, but now I see who you really are. And it's not just your wealth or your position that makes you who you are, it's how you make people feel, how you make me feel." Victor's heart skipped a beat. He had heard her speak about her feelings before, but hearing her say it so plainly made something stir inside him. "Lucia," he began, his voice softer than usual, "I never wanted to hide who I was from you. I was just afraid of you seeing me for what I really am and not wanting anything to do with me." She turned to look at him, her eyes warm. "I get it now," she said quietly. "But you don't need to hide anymore, not from me. I'm starting to see you for who you really are, Victor, and I like what I see. Victor took a deep breath, a weight lifting off his shoulders. She had given him a gift he hadn't expected, understanding, acceptance, and the chance to be himself without fear. It was more than he could have ever hoped for. "I'm glad," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "because I can't be anyone but myself with you, and for the first time in a long time that feels like enough." Lucia reached out and placed her hand on top of his, her touch gentle but reassuring. "It is enough," she whispered. For a moment, they simply sat there, their hands intertwined, the world outside slipping away. There were still challenges ahead, still things they needed to work through, but for the first time, they both felt a sense of peace, the kind of peace that comes when you know you're exactly where you're supposed to be. As the days passed, Lucia and Victor's relationship slowly blossomed. It wasn't the kind of love that happened overnight. It wasn't a whirlwind romance full of grand gestures. Instead, it was the kind of love that grew gradually, steadily, like a seed planted in fertile soil. With every conversation, every moment spent together, they built something real. Victor was patient. He knew that Lucia had been through enough betrayal, enough hurt, that trust couldn't be rushed. But he also knew that the more he showed her his true self, the more she would begin to trust him. And that's exactly what he did. He was present, listening to her, offering his support without pushing. For the first time in his life, he wasn't trying to control the situation. He was letting things unfold naturally. One evening, after closing time at the cafe, Lucia and Victor sat in one of the cozy corners of the cafe, sipping their drinks in a comfortable silence. The place was empty now, the usual hustle and bustle of the day gone. The quiet felt different now, less lonely, more peaceful. They had fallen into a rhythm together, one that made both of them feel like they were in the right place. Lucia took a deep breath, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup as she stared out the window, watching the cars go by outside. "You know," she began, breaking the silence, "when I first met you, I thought you were just like everyone else. You seemed like one of those rich, untouchable businessmen just playing around, but I was wrong." Victor glanced at her, his expression softening as he listened. "I've been called a lot of things, but untouchable is definitely a new one," he joked lightly, trying to lighten the mood. Lucia smiled, but there was a trace of sadness in her eyes. "At first I couldn't see past the mask you were wearing, but now I see who you really are. And it's not just your wealth or your position that makes you who you are, it's how you make people feel, how you make me feel." Victor's heart skipped a beat. He had heard her speak about her feelings before, but hearing her say it so plainly made something stir inside him. "Lucia," he began, his voice softer than usual, "I never wanted to hide who I was from you. I was just afraid of you seeing me for what I really am and not wanting anything to do with me." She turned to look at him, her eyes warm. "I get it now," she said quietly. "But you don't need to hide anymore, not from me. I'm starting to see you for who you really are, Victor, and I like what I see." Victor took a deep breath, a weight lifting off his shoulders. She had given him a gift he hadn't expected, understanding, acceptance, and the chance to be himself without fear. It was more than he could have ever hoped for. "I'm glad," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "because I can't be anyone but myself with you, and for the first time in a long time that feels like enough." Lucia reached out and placed her hand on top of his, her touch gentle but reassuring. "It is enough," she whispered. For a moment, they simply sat there, their hands intertwined, the world outside slipping away. There were still challenges ahead, still things they needed to work through, but for the first time, they both felt a sense of peace, the kind of peace that comes when you know you're exactly where you're supposed to be. In a setting full of secrets and unexpected connections, two worlds collide when a simple young woman finds herself involved with a mysterious and powerful man. But what she doesn't know is that the man she has come to know so intimately is hiding a truth that could change everything.